the war in Ukraine that he promised to end in 24 hours, the United States resisted every attempt at diplomacy to avoid the war and then to end the war. It's disgusting and it's shocking.
So recently, Jeffrey Sachs went on Andrew Napolitano's podcast to blast the Trump administration and the U.S. foreign policy apparatus beyond Trump himself for keeping the proxy war with Russia going despite Trump's campaign promises. He gets into why this is the case, what the ramifications are for all of us, and what we have to deal with as Americans with this in view. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The only word that characterizes Washington, and I'm speaking beyond Trump himself, is pathetic. Nobody speaks the truth. No one says that this completely erratic and dangerous behavior is very damaging to our national security. We had the president shooting off about nuclear this and that in the last few days. Just unbelievable.
Here's what he said, and this is in response to a tweet based on the highly provocative statements of the former president. Chris, can you put it up? Based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Talk about being foolish with words. Why would you do this? And why would you announce it? And why would you provoke another nuclear power that has 3 or 4 times the number of nuclear submarines that we do?
And the reason that this unbelievable posting occurred was in response to a posting by Medvedev, which was in response to an ultimatum delivered by Trump to President Putin that if you don't have a ceasefire in 10 days, I impose the sanctions on all countries in the world that are dealing with you.
Yeah, that's exactly what he did, and that strategy hasn't exactly worked to dispel Russian troops from the Donbass that they occupy something like 85% of. You know, it's never worked, even from Trump's first administration when he was sanctioning Russia for taking Crimea, which Crimeans wanted, by the way. They voted at a margin of 97% that they wanted to be part of Russia, by the way, that the Biden administration continued those sanctions. And now they're talking about secondary tariffs. He's talking about it when it comes to India, which would not only not change this situation, but hurt Americans that are dealing with inflation and high costs, deal with even more of them when it comes to products that Americans enjoy from India. The only exception I take to what Sachs said, I think he's totally right otherwise, is the fact that some people in Washington are standing against these atrocities, notably Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, who deserve a lot of praise for truly being America first and wanting to hold Trump to his commitments to end this war, despite the fact he's not even trying anymore. So there are some. They are a wayward few, but they are there, and Trump's just violating his most basic promises when it comes to this war.
Ultimatum to Russia rather than actual diplomacy. Good luck with that. Ultimatum, an ultimatum. You know, the problem is Trump is, of course, he has no attention span, maybe no understanding, no knowledge of what he's doing. But the fact of the matter is there's no diplomacy taking place right now because the war in Ukraine that he promised to end in 24 hours, which, by the way, could have been ended in 24 hours, not on the basis of an ultimatum or declaring you must have a ceasefire, but on the basis of solving the underlying issue that led us to this war. And this war, as every analyst you talk to says, and as everyone who has looked clearly into this understands came because we pushed NATO up to Russia's borders, because we overthrew a government in Ukraine so that that new government would support NATO, because the government we overthrew wanted neutrality, which is a no-no in American eyes, and because the United States resisted every attempt at diplomacy to avoid the war and then to end the war.
Yeah, he's absolutely accurate about that. There were so many off-ramps to this catastrophe that's unfolded over the last 3 years that weren't taken, and it wasn't just Trump, it was previous administrations as well, despite the fact that William Burns, the ambassador to Ukraine in the Bush administration, wrote to Condoleezza Rice in the Niet Means Niet memo, a declassified memo thanks to Julian Assange, the hero, by the way. You know, Burns said that this is the reddest of red lines, is including Ukraine in NATO. Well, what does the Bush administration do? They hold the Bucharest summit and say, you know, Ukraine and Georgia will be part of NATO. They start to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine under Yanukovych in 2014, replacing him with a bellicose government toward Russia. Sachs is right. The thing the deep state hates the most is neutrality. That's not good enough for the war regime. You have to be with the U.S. They start arming them with the Aegis missile systems and flirting with adding them to Ukraine again. You know, Biden did this, Bush did this, Obama did this, and then Trump continues to rearm them without paying any heed to his campaign promises. What it would take is acknowledge, saying right off the bat, we're not putting Ukraine in NATO, we're withdrawing funding, we're taking the NATO resources out, but they won't do it because this is a lucrative, funnel of money to the military-industrial complex. Trump's in on it.
We absolutely threw out the agreement at the UN called the Minsk II agreement that would have avoided this war, telling the Ukrainians, you don't have to abide by the UN Security Council, and an agreement that the Ukraine itself had signed. And then when there was a peace agreement reached, just about to be reached in April 2022, the US government told the Ukrainians, no, you fight on. We don't want you neutral. We want you on our side. No neutrality. So Trump now gives an ultimatum that doesn't get to any of the root causes of this conflict.
Yeah, he's exactly right there, too. And I'll just clarify, because a lot of people haven't been made privy to this part of this war, which really started in 2014, the war between the Donbass regions that didn't want to be part of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government. They signed the Minsk Accords in 2 phases, one in 2014 and one in 2015. And the latter held that, hey, you have to grant political autonomy to the Donbass regions in a way that, you know, something like Hong Kong enjoys today in China, you know, relative political autonomy, and that has to be acknowledged in your constitution. Not only didn't they do that, the U.S. and, you know, other powers, including Germany, where you had, I think, Merkel, you know, admitting that they never wanted them to agree to that, and they didn't. And then, yeah, you had the Istanbul conference where Putin said that we can have peace, we can end this thing right now, and Zelensky got a much better deal then than he would now because Boris Johnson and the U.S. pressured him out of that. That is what we're getting here because of U.S. intervention. This is an empire-building scheme. It has nothing to do with democracy in Ukraine, to the extent that that's even a reasonable word to attribute to that regime that's suppressing free exercise of thought and religion. They're shutting down Eastern Orthodox churches, you know, destroying adversarial media agents toward the Ukrainian government, suppressing protests. They've imposed martial law. They're expanding conscription mandates where poor old men are being plucked off the street for slavery to the state in this absurd war. That's what we're getting out of this. It's not democracy.
Of course, the ultimatum's not going to be observed, but he's giving an ultimatum to a nuclear superpower. But more than that, he's telling China, India, Brazil, and all the other countries of the world that the United States demands that they stop trading with Russia as well. Oh, fancy that. You think that's going to work? That the United States, that the president of the United States can just dictate to the whole world what to do? No, that is not how conflicts are resolved. That's not how diplomacy works. That's not, and this is the most important point, that's not how American security is achieved. Trump is driving America into the greatest insecurity that we have had in decades, certainly since the worst moments of the Cold War, if not worse than that.
Yeah, I hate to agree with this. I didn't think I would actually be agreeing to this. I actually did believe, despite the fact I never supported Trump, that he would start drawing down from Ukraine, but it looks like all we get is escalations and a continuation of the Biden policy. The only difference between that and this is that they've opened negotiations, supposedly, with Russia, but it isn't really negotiations. It's ultimatums like this promise to impose secondary tariffs because, hey, the first round of economic sanctions that, Trump and Biden imposed didn't exactly work, and it doesn't seem to be swaying the battlefield in the favor of Ukraine at all. Instead, we just get $200 billion down the drain. How much more do you want for those nuclear submarines and whatever other escalation is being planned? I mean, it's just fruitless and senseless, and the only answer is disengagement. That would force the peace. That's the way to end the war. They're pretending that there's still no off-ramp, and I assure you there is. It's no Ukraine and NATO, and stop bankrolling this stupid, senseless, moronic war.
Right now, by this obstreperous, vituperative, unstable, or anti-diplomacy that we're engaged in. Sit and talk and resolve serious issues like grown-ups. Not this shooting off in the most provocative possible ways. But again, I have to emphasize, Trump does it. It's disgusting and it's shocking. But in Washington, no one says anything else because it's as if the rest of the constitutional order has disappeared in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this mentality certainly isn't confined to Trump alone. It sweeps through the Washington political establishment, the military-industrial complex, and all the war lobbies, the bomb makers, the neocons, the establishment liberals that want nothing more than to shove, the future of America's posterity and what they could have down into the coffers and pockets of Zelensky. It doesn't really make any sense. There are a few that do speak against it, like I talked about before. You got your Massey and Rand Paul and some others, but it is true that, most of the Republicans that are in office that dominate both houses right now of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, almost all of them, to a man or woman, did not campaign on more funding and more escalations in the war in Ukraine. But very few have spoken up about it because Trump commands so much authority. He has a big cult of personality behind him, and people in Congress are just generally willing to defer to him, it seems. Even as he surrounds himself with people like Keith Kellogg, a total neocon, pro-Ukraine zealot, and Marco Rubio being appointed to the Secretary of State with a long track record of supporting Ukraine financially and militarily, and we think that that's not going to influence him in some way, even if his instincts were sometimes good on this issue, which I think they were. He said some of the right things, but how much of that was just a campaign vehicle? I think we're finding that out more and more, that was done more to get elected than a decent representation of what Trump had in his heart when it came to Ukraine, because we're still funding this monstrosity. It's coming out of the pockets of the American taxpayer, that many of us are having trouble making ends meet, suffering through inflation, high medical costs, home ownership's an impossibility for a lot of Americans now. And we have this problem looming above us that would be so easy to rid ourselves of if we had a sensible foreign policy, the kind of foreign policy that Sachs rightly says that we don't have because of these evil tendencies. It'd be so easy to remove this gorilla from our back by ditching these empire building schemes and the idea that you constantly have to antagonize nuclear powers, including the biggest nuclear power in the world in regard to nuclear stockpiles, because Russia is exactly that. They have the biggest nuclear stockpile in terms of warheads in the world, more so than the United States. it doesn't benefit us in any way. It benefits us to actually have good relations with Russia, even those that existed in like 2000. You know, the mask dropped a long time ago when it came to this criminal regime. And I think it started mostly when Russian troops moved into Syria in 2015 and denied the U.S. a regime change there, as Obama had hoped. And it's been going downhill ever since. It's all been part of these empire-building schemes that Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul, you know, warned about. Dennis Kucinich warned about. That's the road to perdition. It's the road to hell. And that's the road my criminal government has taken. And it's not just in Ukraine, it's in Israel too. But alas, we won't go down that rabbit hole, at least in this video. But I do want to hear from what you guys say. Let me know down below. Is Jeffrey Sachs right? Weren't there a lot of off-ramps in this war? Why does the war continue? What are the forces tugging Trump in this direction? What do you think's responsible for it? And why don't more Republicans speak up about it? Let me know down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Judge Napolitano as well. He's awesome. Please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll support the channel, which I will tip my hat in graciousness to you if you do that, but I'll also give you the gift of getting access to all my videos before they go live on my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.